So next then, we're looking at the possible actual responses that you guys could use. So some possible answers. Because of the type of question it is, has X reduced Y? Yeah, you can turn it into algebra. Has this done that? Well, how can you answer that question? Either it has or it hasn't is most simple. Okay, so yes, X has reduced Y, or no, X has not reduced Y. That's the simplest way. But you could also argue that it is too difficult to tell. So you might just simply say, well, we can't actually really tell if the anti-racism movement has reduced racism or not. And in all of these cases, you really have to be specific, and you have to explain why you are arguing yes, no, or too difficult to tell. So what are some example arguments then? If you're arguing yes, if you're saying the anti-racism movement has reduced racism, then you might say because ethnic minorities have more political rights and more economic opportunities than before the anti-racism movement. But because you have to be specific, you have to say, okay, well, which ethnic minorities and what rights and what economic opportunities and before what movement? And that's why lecture one is important, because there could be lots of anti-racism movements. You need to say what they were and when they were. Well, you could say society is less racist in the countries where anti-racism movements or the movement have operated. Okay. And to do that, you need to cite a lot of surveys and other sorts of statistics. Okay. And then you could make another argument, which is you could say the anti-racism movement has reduced racism because non-dominant cultures, so not in some instances, not the white people, other cultures or other types of people are more visible in society. So you might say that shows that racism has been reduced. Or you might say, although racism, you might have a but, so you might say it has been reduced, but although it's still present, it must be said that on balance, there is a bit less racism than ... previously. Okay, or you might say, although there's still implicit bias, structural racism, there's a bit less overt racism or explicit racism. And you might say, that's not necessarily good, it's just different, it's just gone down in one way, increased in another. It might be worse, it might be better, but you're just saying the facts as you see them. Or you can argue that the anti-racism movement has not reduced racism because, and then some reasons. So here's an example, and you don't have to follow any of these examples at all. They're just purely there because they are potential ones that you might argue. In order to do well, you really need to think for yourself what answer you want to give. And these are just example arguments so that I can show you that any of these arguments could be argued and you could produce evidence for them. So I'm showing that there's loads and loads of answers. And if you agree with one of them, then by all means you can make the argument. But of course, they need a lot more work and they need counter arguments against them. But here are some potentials. So, one, while there have been some improvements in areas such as employment, ethnic minorities actually face worse forms of racism than before this movement or that movement in specific areas such as income inequality and police brutality, for example. Okay, so you're not just saying, no, they haven't worked. You're actually giving specific ways in which they haven't worked. Or you might say, although anti-racism movements have been impressive or brave. Some forms of the movements have, unfortunately, or you might not say unfortunately, you might just say they've provoked backlash that has, in fact, led to increasing divisions in society and more hostility to ethnic minorities or more racism. You might argue that the anti-racism movement has not reduced racism because the movement feeds culture wars, which are radicalizing some areas of society against ethnic minorities, or that it feeds these culture wars, this identity politics that we talked about, which again increases violence or racist extremism. Or you could draw from lecture 5 and say, although there have been some reductions in some forms of racism, racism is still present in crucial areas such as medicine or technology or artificial intelligence.